Hey, how you doing? ACTE 699. Dan Herr here for Module 6. Almost a month and a half in, right? So let's do this thing. Standardized testing. The pitfalls, the positives, and everything in between. How would you describe this data collection technique? Well, no surprises here. It's a quantitative data collection technique. And in its very name, it's standardized. We think oftentimes of the PSSAs, the Keystones, which are both state level testings, but it's easy to forget about the SATs, the ACTs, the ASVABs, which are all national testing as well. One of the positives is because they are either statewide or national-wide testing, a lot of their testing banks are overlooked and overseen by test question committees, which is there to eliminate bias. And if I could add my 2 cents, I would say eliminate bias because they do their best, but nobody's perfect, right? I will say though, it's definitely a step up from a teacher just writing a test, say a formative or summative assessment, or even just a group of teachers. All too often there's unintentional bias that gets worked in, and I think that right there, that's a whole dissertation waiting to be had, but that's neither here nor there. Some of the unique processes with standardized testing, especially at the state level, is you can look for something called adequate yearly progress, AYP, which is great because then you're comparing the student to themselves. Not to say that there's anything wrong with comparing an individual to a parameter or a subgroup to a subgroup, but it's not always quite as telling. For instance, if you're a third grade teacher and one particular cohort is maybe a little stronger than the next cohort, you might look at the data and feel bad about your teaching prowess, but in reality, it's just a lurking variable, which whole nother story again for a whole other time. But yeah, qualitative or quantitative, we mentioned that already. Definitely quantitative. There's not really, to speak of, any qualitative data that gets taken on by standardized testing, which is one of the weaknesses because there's no real student feedback or input other than we as teachers. We hear a lot of times about how much our students love standardized testing, right? What does it best answer? Again, coming back to that adequate yearly progress, that's a great comparison because, again, you're tracking a particular student along the way. Now, for your SATs, ACTs, ASVABs, more than or less, they're just sort of a one-time standardized testing. You can compare the individual to the parameter, the entire average. Or even a subgroup like a statistic and whatnot. But it can, again, be a little misleading when teachers try to compare cohorts to cohorts because, again, lurking variables. That's a statistics thing. We talk about it all the time, trying to eliminate those because then you can really sort of focus in on what's working. Along those lines, in fact, that's perfect transition. What concerns do we have? It's tricky to really use your standardized testing in trying to determine what methodology works best. For instance, if you're going to do an entire year of flipped classroom, right? And then you compare your 8th grade English students compared to their 7th grade PSSA scores. Well, is it really the methodology that led to that progress or maybe worse, maybe not enough growth, or were there other things going on? Because it's such a quick snapshot, it's very, very difficult to eliminate all those extra variables. Also, and I alluded to this earlier, that you want to be careful about cohort to cohort comparisons, just reflecting true stories. I think about the same thing with my upcoming study. It's tricky to compare the 2022 cohort to the 2021 because there's so many other variables going on that it's hard to eliminate all those and say, concretely, this is what's causing the growth or the loss of understanding. But I also don't want to paint a horrible picture for something as large as the SATs, ACTs, statewide testing. It's kind of the best deal in town, right? Because something of that large of a scope, it's really the only way to roll with it. So, yeah, hopefully that was beneficial, and we'll see you online. Peace.